What if everything you thought was secure, your housing, your rent assistance, even the roof over your head, could vanish without a single warning letter? That's exactly what's happening to some veterans right now. A new rule change, buried deep in federal housing policy, is quietly shaking up how veteran benefits are counted. And for many, it could mean losing the very support they depend on to stay housed. The worst part? Most people haven't heard about it. Not from a VA, not from their caseworkers, and not from anyone they trust. One day, your housing voucher is approved. The next, it's under review. And the reason? A subtle shift in how your VA disability income is calculated, or in some cases, recalculated after the fact. It sounds like a technical change, but for the veterans caught in the middle of it, it's personal, it's painful, and it's potentially devastating. If you rely on HUD-VSH Section 8 or any kind of housing assistance tied to income, or if you plan to in the future, what you learn in the next few minutes could mean the difference between keeping your home or losing it without warning. Stay with me, because this new rule might sound helpful on the surface, but what's happening behind the scenes could affect far more veterans than anyone's admitting. And once you understand how it works, you'll never look at your housing benefits the same way again. The change started quietly, no big headlines, no major announcement, but for thousands of veterans relying on housing support, its impact could be life-changing. In early 2024, the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced a major adjustment to how it handles VA disability income in one of its most critical programs, HUD-VSH. On paper, the update looks like progress. Under the new rule, VA disability compensation will no longer be counted as income when calculating rent contributions for veterans using HUD-VSH vouchers. That means more disabled veterans can qualify, and those already in the program might see their out-of-pocket rent drop significantly. Sounds like a win, right? But here's the problem. Not every veteran understands what this rule actually applies to. And even fewer realize where the line between federal policy and local implementation gets blurry or dangerous. HUD-VSH is just one housing support option. It's designed for veterans who are homeless or at high risk of becoming homeless. It pairs a Section 8-style rental voucher with case management and VA services. For those who qualify, it can be life-saving. But this new rule, excluding VA disability income from rent calculations, only applies to the HUD-VSH program. If you're receiving standard Section 8 assistance, state-run housing help, or local rental subsidies, this rule might not apply to you at all. And if you assume it does, you could unknowingly give inaccurate income information, putting your benefits and your housing at risk. Even more concerning, some housing authorities are slow to implement the change. Others have misinterpreted it. There are reports of veterans being told the opposite, that their disability still counts, simply because their case manager hasn't been updated. In the meantime, some have had their rent miscalculated, their eligibility questioned, or their housing status thrown into chaos. And this is where it starts to get dangerous. Because once your rent or voucher is recalculated based on wrong information, it can trigger back payments, overpayment letters, or even benefit suspensions. All because of a rule that was meant to help, but wasn't explained clearly enough to protect you. The bottom line? Just because you're receiving VA disability doesn't mean you're automatically protected by this rule. It only shields you inside HUD-VSH. And if you're not careful, this so-called benefit can become a blind spot. One that leaves you vulnerable to losing the very support system you fought hard to qualify for. And what's even more alarming, this isn't the only part of the system creating confusion, because who qualifies and who doesn't is about to become a much bigger problem. Most veterans assume that if a federal housing rule changes, it applies to everyone the same way. But that's where things get messy, because who actually qualifies for this new rule and who doesn't isn't nearly as simple as it sounds. The policy about excluding VA disability income only applies to one group, veterans who are part of the HUD-VSH program. That's a specific partnership between the Department of Veterans Affairs and local public housing agencies aimed at helping veterans who are homeless or at serious risk of homelessness. If you're not in that program, if you're using traditional Section 8 state-funded housing or local rent assistance, this rule does not protect you. And here's where things get dangerous. Some veterans hear about the new change and assume it applies to any housing program connected to the VA. They tell their case manager that their disability pay isn't countable income, but if they're not in HUD-VASH, that information might actually be wrong, and giving it could put their entire application or current benefits in jeopardy. Even worse, some veterans are enrolled in housing programs that look like HUD-VASH, but aren't. Cities sometimes rebrand housing initiatives with veteran-friendly names or run state-level programs that mimic HUD policies. If you're not reading the fine print, or if no one tells you what kind of voucher you really have, you might not even realize you're outside the scope of the rule. And this isn't just a technical error. The difference between being protected and being exposed can come down to a few lines of paperwork. One mistake, one assumption, one unchecked box, and suddenly your income is being counted, your eligibility is being re-examined, or worse, your rent shoots up unexpectedly because you thought your disability payments were exempt. This rule is being praised as a step forward, and for many, it is. But the truth is, it only helps the veterans who are already inside a very specific lane. Everyone else? They're still operating under the same complicated, outdated income rules as before. And if you're not crystal clear about which side of that line you fall on, the system won't protect you. It'll penalize you. So, before you make decisions based on the headlines, you need to know exactly where you stand. Because the confusion over who qualifies is only the beginning, the real problem starts when your income is redefined. One of the most misunderstood parts of this new rule is how income is defined and redefined depending on when and how you apply for benefits. Veterans are being told your VA disability won't count anymore, but no one's explaining what happens when the system decides to take another look. Because while the rule may say your compensation is excluded now, that doesn't mean it's excluded forever. Let's break it down. If you apply for HUD-VASH today, your VA disability compensation is no longer considered part of your income when they calculate your rent. That sounds like a win. But here's where it gets risky. If your situation changes and you don't report it properly, your income could be reevaluated using older standards or local interpretations. And that reevaluation might not go in your favor. You get a part-time job? Suddenly, your income gets rechecked. You move to a new property or housing authority, your entire file gets reopened. Even something as simple as a yearly recertification could become a moment where your VA compensation is dragged back into the picture, especially if your caseworker isn't up to speed or your documentation isn't clear. And it doesn't always take a big change. Some veterans report receiving letters about their income being recalculated because of minor shifts, a raise in Social Security, a cost of living adjustment in VA pay, or even a flagged inconsistency between their HUD file and what's on record with the IRS. These small details can trigger an audit of your eligibility, and once that happens, anything not perfectly documented can be used against you, including the VA compensation you thought was excluded. The worst part? In some cases, the rule is applied retroactively but only partially. You might have your rent lowered today, but still owe back rent from a previous period where the old rule was applied. That's how some veterans end up with overpayment demands, even after their benefits were adjusted in their favor. There's also a gray area with hybrid income. If you're working part-time and also receiving disability, some housing authorities may try to apply blended rules, counting one source, excluding another, and leaving you confused and frustrated. And when you ask for clarification, most of the time, the people making the decisions can't give you a straight answer either. This is the real danger. You're being told one thing, while the system still operates with two sets of rules, one on paper and one in practice. So, if you think your income is now fully protected just because of this new rule, think again. Because all it takes is one review, one move, one missed detail, and your housing status could shift overnight. And that leads directly into the next hidden trap when state and local agencies follow different playbooks entirely. Just because the federal rule says your VA disability income won't be counted doesn't mean every agency agrees. And that's where things take a sharp turn. Because while HUD VSH operates under national guidelines, many local and state housing programs still follow their own rules, and they don't always care what the VA or HUD says. Here's what that means. You could move to a different county or state thinking your benefits are safe, only to find out the local housing authority still treats your VA disability pay as income. They might say, "We haven't updated our policies yet," or "that only applies to federal housing programs, not this one," and suddenly your rent goes up, your voucher shrinks, or you lose eligibility altogether. This isn't hypothetical. It's happening. Veterans in mixed-income housing, transitional programs, and even subsidized senior housing have reported being blindsided when their VA disability income was counted against them, even after the federal change. Why? Because those programs aren't bound by HUD VSH guidelines. They follow state-level or local criteria, which vary wildly. Some exclude disability pay. Others don't. Some update policy immediately. Others take months or years. And if you try to fight it, you'll often hit a wall. That's just how we calculate it here. We haven't received new guidance yet, or worse, silence. Meanwhile, your rent is being recalculated based on income you were told wouldn't count. And there's no consistency, no appeals process, no one to step in and fix it quickly. Even something as simple as moving to a neighboring county could reset your benefits. You might keep your voucher, but the rules tied to that voucher change depending on who's managing it. One agency might exclude your VA pay, while the next one includes it. And unless you know how to read the fine print or catch it before you sign a lease, there's nothing you can do after the fact. Here's the truth. The system isn't built to tell you these things. It assumes you already know. And if you don't, the consequences fall on you, not them. So don't wait for the problem to show up in your mailbox. Don't assume the new rule is covering you just because it made a headline. This is your housing, your income, your security, and the more proactive you are today, the fewer surprises you'll face tomorrow. Because the next risk on the horizon isn't just policy confusion, it's something even sneakier. Silent reviews and sudden reallocation of your benefits, often without any advance notice. Just when you think you've figured out the rules, something changes, and you don't even know it's happening. That's the most dangerous part of the system, the silent reviews. They're not announced. They don't come with a warning. And if you're not watching closely, they can unravel everything you've built without ever giving you a chance to respond. Here's how it works. Housing authorities and the VA have the right to reassess your eligibility at any time. That could mean a routine file review, a flagged data match with the IRS, or a system update that re-triggers your case for recalculation. And you may not find out until a letter shows up telling you your rent is increasing, or worse, that your housing support has been revoked. Sometimes it starts with a small inconsistency. Maybe your reported income doesn't match what another agency sees. Maybe your disability percentage changed. Maybe your spouse got a part-time job and someone logged it in a shared file. These changes get pulled into databases that don't always communicate clearly with you, but they definitely talk to each other. And then there's benefit reallocation. This is when housing agencies make internal decisions to shift resources from one category to another, and that can mean fewer vouchers available, more aggressive eligibility screenings, or changes in how income is counted for active participants. It doesn't always affect you immediately, but it can affect you the next time your case comes up for renewal. Imagine thinking your rent is locked in, only to be told that the rules have shifted and you now owe more because your benefits no longer qualify under current calculations. You didn't do anything wrong. The system just changed, and you weren't notified until the consequences were already at your door. Some veterans have lost their vouchers this way. Others were forced to pay back months of housing assistance they thought was secure. And by the time they tried to appeal, the deadline had already passed because they didn't even realize the clock had started ticking. This is why being passive isn't safe anymore. You can't wait for the VA or HUD or your caseworker to alert you. You have to assume the system is reviewing your file even when it's silent. And the best defense is preparation, clear records, regular follow-ups, and staying connected with real advocates who understand the system inside and out. Because in a world where housing security can shift overnight, knowledge isn't just power, it's protection. And if you don't keep your eye on these silent triggers, the rug can be pulled out from under you before you even know it's moving. And now that you've seen how quickly the ground can shift, let's pull it all together and talk about what this really means for your future. When you hear about a policy change that's supposed to help veterans, the last thing you expect is for it to put your housing at risk. But that's the reality we're facing. On the surface, the new rule sounds like progress. Excluding VA disability from income calculations should have made life easier. But once you peel back the layers, the picture isn't so simple. What we've uncovered is a system filled with contradictions. A rule that protects some, but not all. Agencies that follow different guidelines depending on your zip code. Caseworkers who mean well, but aren't always up to date. And behind all of that, a structure that's quietly shifting, pulling safety nets out from under people who've done everything right. If you're a veteran depending on housing support, or even just planning ahead for the future, you can't afford to rely on assumptions anymore. You need clarity. You need control. And most of all, you need to know how to protect yourself before the next policy shift hits. Take a moment right now and think about your current situation. Do you know what program you're in? Do you know what your benefits depend on? Would you know if something changed tomorrow? Because here's the truth. No one's coming to double-check that you're safe. That responsibility falls on you, and the best thing you can do is stay ahead of it. We'd love to hear from you. If any part of this video opened your eyes or gave you clarity, leave a comment below and let us know what stood out. Or share your experience, because sometimes one veteran's story is the exact thing someone else needs to hear before they make a costly mistake. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Your support helps us keep bringing forward real stories, real warnings, and the kind of information that actually matters. Thank you for spending this time with us, and remember, what protects your home isn't just a piece of paper or a policy. It's what you know, what you watch for, and what you refuse to overlook. Stay sharp, stay informed, and take care of yourself. We'll see you in the next video.